Welcome to the World Wild Podcast. I'm Miles Irving, and in a few moments I'll be welcoming Eleonora Matarrese to the podcast. We have a really interesting conversation, it's very welcome to me to have somebody from a country that we haven't had before on the podcast. Because if you think about it, the name World Wild Podcast, we are attempting or aspiring to have some kind of representation of what's going on with human beings engaging with the wilds, especially through wild food and all of the culture around it across the globe. So in a way, it's embarrassing that so many of our guests have been from so few countries. So yeah, it's really fantastic to welcome Eleonora for that reason, apart from anything else. But some of the subjects that we get into are also very essential to the wider themes that we're trying to cover about re-engaging human beings with ecosystems and what that all means. And particularly, you'll see there's an exploration of the issue of language, which I think is something we should explore more deeply from several different perspectives around the world, because obviously as we explore, the languages do provide almost a documentation of people's relationship with other species and landscapes, the particular actual languages and local dialects as well. And I think they also provide a means to sort of be in the world differently. So it's a big issue that I think we should probably explore more, about the extinction of languages which are ways essentially of being in the world, when people can talk about the world they're in a way that basically carries on what's been passed down from many generations of people experiencing the world and forming that way of conceptualizing and speaking about it that's embodied in that language. And we're actually, just to give some news, we're working on a foraging zine at the moment, which is going to pull together voices from several members of the Association of Foragers. I'm very excited about that. It's going to be a zine that's aimed as an outreach tool, basically, to enable people that either don't forage or have very basic knowledge of foraging to engage with the plants, mostly plants, in their immediate surroundings, and it'll be kind of relevant to urban contexts as much as anywhere else. So that's quite exciting, in a multi-voice thing. And one of the articles that's going to go in there's a lady called Amy Rankin, who's going to be doing some stuff on Indigenous languages in the British Isles, and how plants have been named, and therefore the relationships that those names have carried on through those traditions with those particular languages. The other thing about language is, and not so much necessarily kind of endangered Indigenous languages, but the work that Eleonora has done, which I think is quite unique, and we're going to hear more about that. Just being a multilinguist, being able to access the different voices that are buried away there in historical texts and documents. It's a very exciting way that we can reconnect with traditions, and because whilst I've touched on this elsewhere to really big up the power and, in many senses, superiority of oral traditions over the literary ones, because they are so much more kind of alive. That knowledge is transferred through actual acts of communication between people, living bodies that are present in the same space, talking to each other. So there is that kind of redressing the balance that the so-called pre-literate cultures are in many ways superior to us, because of those kind of embodied experiences. The knowledge is to do with presence and being passed on in a very intimate way between people from one generation to another. Still, all of the many texts that we've got can sometimes hold on to things that haven't been passed on through those oral cultures. And so they have anchored memories and stories and recipes and approaches and relationships to plants hidden away in texts which maybe are not read. So what Eleonora has done is really powerful and exciting and quite unique, I think. So you'll get to hear more about that. But I was talking to Joel, who's our editor, the podcast editor, and he was describing Eleonora as like a kind of Indiana Jones of wild food knowledge, which I think that's quite exciting to think about it in that way. Okay, so that's enough for a preamble, I think, and we'll just get on now with the conversation with Eleonora. Perhaps we could start our chat with you just telling a little bit of your story.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's very nice being here. And I started foraging and knowing wild food when I was a child. I mean, I was actually 2.5 years because my grandmother, I'm from Apulia, South Italy, and my grandmother used to forage herself, not because we were poor in our family, but simply because it was natural, as it really is. It still is now. In South Italy, it's common for people going in the countryside because almost everybody has got a field, a bit of land to go there and gather some wild herbs. And so I started like this. I've even counted the species she taught me about, 36, mainly, chicory, dandelion, the simplest one to begin with. And when I was 9 years old, I was gifted with my first knife to go alone. And, we used to eat all those species in the typical recipes of the farmers. Then later, when I started, I began to study, and I graduated in foreign languages. So I had the opportunity to translate a lot of books. I started studying.
Wow.
Yeah, more species, more herbs. And the challenge was when I moved to North Italy and I started living in the mountains. And the problem is that I've always been living on the seaside. So there were completely different species, and I really started studying a lot. So that's the base, of my story. With this, there's also the fact that my grandmother, when she was a child, her father was a chef. Well, actually, the story is that I wrote a book about my foraging story, and the publisher asked me, but why did your grandmother know so much about wild herbs? And so I started, delving into it, and I discovered that when my grandmother was, let's say, 8, 9 years old, she used to say, I went to an old big house, and my mother, my great grandmother, used to put me socks on. And I said, why? That's because in during the World War, it was not so normal to wear socks and go outside home. And that was because her father was a chef and went to this nobleman's house. And this nobleman from Rome had this big house, and he worked as a chef, but there was a botanist who was in care of his garden. And my grandmother, as a child, she used to stay with her father in the kitchen, but at the same time in the garden with the botanist. And so she started learning all the binomials and all the plants.
It's great, but where do the socks come in?
Yeah. No, she wore the socks because she was going in a noble environment, and she needed to be well dressed, not as she was in the countryside. And so I remember when I was 3, 4, we went near the plants, and she told me, bellis perennis, the daisy. The Taraxacum officinale, and I said, but why? And she taught me every plant has got its name and a name, and it's better to learn them by heart because it's just like, with people. And so Eleonora Matarrese, Miles Irving, bellis perennis, and so on. So that's the base of the story. After that, cooking has always been a pleasure for me. And I've always been cooking at home for my sisters and my family. And one day, I worked as a Congress organizer, as a translator. I've always been doing many things in my life. And I used to prepare cakes and dinners for, neighbors. And one of them told me, but what are you doing here? You need to follow that path. And the person to which I owe the fact that I followed my path was my previous boss, my last boss. I worked in a multinational company, and we, in those places they have meetings for business, team building, and we went to a very famous restaurant near Tuscany. And once there, my boss asked me to cook for all my colleagues. I was ashamed. I was afraid because it was my first time in a restaurant kitchen. And, while cooking, he came and told me, what are you doing in this company? This is not your path. And so I left everything and I opened my restaurant.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a great challenge, actually.
Yeah. So you were able to pull together some elements, though, like the cooking and this knowledge about plants that comes together in your restaurant, right?
Yeah. It's been the first, I think, even the only one in Italy to offer a kind of wild cuisine, but plant-based. Yeah. That is, there's tons of chefs using wild herbs, but together with meat or other ingredients.
Yeah.
My cuisine is practically wild-based. I only use flour, parmesan, and extra virgin olive oil. All the rest is wild species, so plants, seaweed, trees, berries, whatever.
That's incredible. And you're not using meat and fish, or you are?
No, I use meat and fish only if people request it. For example, for, marriages, or if there's a party, they ask finger food with some meat or fish, I use it. But I prefer not to, because I think it's a kind of philosophy. I mean, if I'm using wild plants, I think it's also necessary for people to understand the value behind it. And also because I've been speaking about this with a great Italian chef about, the flavors. If you use just plants, it's just like our mouth can taste better the subtle differences. For example, my salad that in Italian we call misticanza, because it's a mix, contains more than 100 species, depending on the season, the micro season, because actually my menu changes every, let's say, 4-7 days according to my morning forage, and it's without any olive oil or vinegar or whatever. I mean, it's just plants, because people need to taste every single leaf, flower, petal, whatever, and it's astonishing seeing their face when they try that.
So no dressing at all, just plants?
No, at the beginning, no. I bring the dish and I say, just taste, and if you like, after that you can add dressing. And it's incredible because most of people don't add it.
I mean, it's funny because I've thought about this, and when you think about the elements of the dressing, things that you might put in a dressing, you might put in some vinegar or other sorts of acid like lemon juice. You might put in some mustard.
Yeah, of course.
You might put in some honey and things. And so, like, if you've got sorrel in your salad, well, maybe you don't need the vinegar. If you've got some mustard leaves in your salad, well, you don't need the mustard. And if you have something with a little bit of sweetness, then you don't need. So I have thought about this, but I've not actually been that radical like that to serve it without a dressing at all.
Well,
that's interesting, and it's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Well, actually, it's not being radical. I mean, it was a choice because it was a kind of need on my side to let them people learn. Because, of course, there's a kind of job behind it. You can't put, let's say, 80% in the lion, otherwise the mix will be sour and it's not worth it. But there's a kind of, job done in order to use different percentages of different herbs to obtain a kind of balance. Yeah. And after that, as you said, well, actually, the dressing I propose is apart from extra virgin olive oil from Apulia, from my family, because we have olive trees. It's wild. I mean, dressing is wild. My favorite vinegar has been created with an initial damage because I forage a lot of black figs straight from the tree. Yeah. It was, I think, July, mid-June, or the beginning of July. And as I usually do, the period is when you have tons of fruits, you have to go outside and gather them all. And so I said, okay, I put them on a dish on the table and I will come back later. The problem is that they were really ripe. And so in the afternoon, there were tons of, midges, flies, whatever. And there was, in my kitchen, there was a chaos. And I said, I can't use them anymore. And I remember I went near those figs, just imagining, I have to throw them away. And I could smell vinegar. And I said, oh, well, I will filter them. And that is my main vinegar infused with elderflowers. And there's also a herb that has a very different flavor according to the place where you forage it. It's called Glaucoma hyderacea. I don't know, probably it's a round ivy, maybe?
Ground ivy.
Ground ivy, yeah, ground ivy. And the Glaucoma hyderacea is, put in vinegar as you would do with, a tea. Gaze a strong flavor and left inside black fig's vinegar, let it become a bit like balsamic vinegar because it belongs to the mint family.
Yeah.
And so the flavor, the mix of the flavors is amazing. So, it's a mix of flavors on my tongue, a bit of study and a bit of experiment, of course. And that's what I like, because you never stop experimenting.
Well, I think when you look at what most chefs have as their basic sort of palette of flavors and ingredients, and then you look away to the wild palette of flavors and ingredients and realize that we have hundreds of species. It's another game. It's another.
I agree.
Whole other situation to begin with that many elements. And
it's amazing.
Yeah, no, I'm amazed at what you're describing in terms of your extremely wild approach.
Yeah.
Because I've actually not heard of anybody else doing this. Like the engagement of chefs with wild foods is very exciting, but at the same time, I feel it only goes so far.
I know.
We are only in terms of the kind of the scene, the scene around restaurants using wild foods. It's to be honest, it's very shallow because there's so many more species. Most people only use a small range of species. And then the repertoire of recipes and approaches to those species is still quite narrow. There's many more things. So this is amazing.
Thank you. Actually, what I do, but it's not because I decided to do that. It's quite normal for me because, as I was telling you before, we weren't poor. when I was a child, but it was that my grandmother used to cook that way. So everything, for example, let's talk about orange soda, the orange juice with bubbles,
Yes.
We didn't have oranges because mainly in Sicily they grow oranges. In Apulia they started later. And what my grandma did was going in the field, let's say at 5 p.m. in the afternoon. She took my hand, say, come with me. We went in the field and we gathered meadowsweet. And with, the flowers, the tiny flowers, the small flowers, the buds actually not properly opened, she put them into a glass, a bottle with some sugar and let it ferment for, let's say, 3 days. And after that we had, I can say the commercial name, but you know what. So, and this is what I learned and what I've been doing throughout all my life till now. I mean, substituting, trying to find the right wild species to do something in the kitchen. And I found something very useful to help me with that in almonds, because even if almonds are not practically wild, but they helped me in finding a substitute for almost everything concerning milk. So milk, butter, cream, whatever. And using them as a neutral base, they also help in let the wild flavors come on the surface. And so I can probably say that the main aspect I've been studying lately is, in the recent times particularly, is how to use wild plants, berries, trees, whatever, instead of. And that's what I do in, for example, traditional Italian recipes. Pesto. Okay, pesto is made with basil, but instead of basil, pesto is the simplest one, but you can use almost everything. Or I love wild garlic, of course, but I really love invasive species, also because you have so many people throw them away. It's a pity, also because my concern, particularly in these days, is about preserving the environment and trying to preserve biodiversity, which is something I don't want to say that I've lost, but most of the people living in the cities and no more in the countryside can't cope with that, can't understand that.
Well, I think it's funny you mentioned the word biodiversity. I guess it's a very relevant word, but I was thinking just a minute ago about this international convention on biodiversity. This was I don't know if you're familiar with it, but this was one of the outputs of the Rio summit back in 1992, where all the world's governments got together and started to say, like, we need to think of a different approach because we are ruining the planet. Well, of course, it's a long time ago now. What's that? It's nearly 30 years ago. And that's where the whole idea of sustainable development was first talked about. I'll just talk about this for a minute because it's just to give some background and come back to your point about biodiversity. So for me, the idea of sustainable development, no matter what's happened since, whether we've succeeded in doing anything that looks like that, but the idea, I think, is an excellent one because it takes this sense that some people need more development of some sort, like they need better infrastructure of some sort. But the idea that people need to exist and need to have certain resources in order to live.
Yeah, of course.
On the one hand, so there's the human need. On the other hand, there's the rest of the biosphere and all of the ecology of the planet, the different habitats, the different species. Yeah. So when we just think about development, we're going to just try not to think about the second one. We're just thinking,
I know.
you know, people need clothes, they need petrol to drive their cars, we just need all this stuff. And then we think, yeah, it's fair enough if people in some remote village overseas somewhere where they don't even have electricity, you know, we want to develop so that they have the stuff that we have and everybody can have. But we've got to forget about the habitats. We've got to forget about the ecosystem, because we all know if everyone has the same lifestyle that we have in the West, in more developed nations, that they can't have it. You know, everybody can't have that, you know. So the idea of sustainable development was that actually, if we could find a way to meet people's needs, which was somehow not taking too much from the ecology and not destroying habitats, if there was some way for us to be getting what we need in some kind of wonderful balance and even reciprocity, you know, that actually, and it's true, you know, like in subsistence farming, well, the result of subsistence farming methods in the UK, there's this great, I think I got this quote right. This guy E.O. Wilson, he's like an ecologist, and he says that biodiversity was at its peak just before the Industrial Revolution in the UK. So, in other words, human presence and everything we were doing was actually creating habitats.
Yeah,
we weren't doing it because we were trying to have nature reserves. It's because of everything we were doing to get what we needed was altering the environment and made it more productive and more biodiverse. So this idea that, you know, development could be to develop ways of getting our resources that cause this kind of interaction, reciprocity, two-way stuff, and this complex system between our culture and the culture of ecology, that means that not only do we get plenty, but we're enhancing the systems of life by what we're doing. So that to me, I think, is a faultless idea. Sustainable development, if you conceive it in the way that, and I think that's the way it was basically conceived, to say we don't want to see that there's an opposition. Over here we've got biodiversity and ecology. Over here we've got humans that have needs. We don't want to see that, like, for the humans to get what they need, we're going to destroy this. It's the idea that we can make a marriage between the two.
Yeah, that's exactly what I always say at the beginning of my courses, for example, because, you know, usually people come following your courses because they want to know about cooking, identifying the herbs in order to go home and prepare. But I always say my first thing is don't destroy, try to forage. I always say, for example, 5% of a plant or parts of it, because there's, well, actually other foragers, okay, but mainly animals and trees and the habitat and whatever. And for example, also considering the habitat, if a plant is there, there's a reason. If you eliminate it's wrong, not just because you are eliminating the plant itself, but because it's a ring in a chain. And many people can't understand that. So I think it's a very important focus. Apart from, you know, people saying, but the planet is on ruin, we're wasting a lot. Yes, that's important, but it's our behavior. And also the fact that, for example, many, as I was telling you before, many invasive plants can help in feeding or, let's say, tissues, clothes, fuel, or, I mean, as you said before, everything we need.
Yeah.
But with a different point of view. I think this is very important.
Well, it's basically the fact that we're using things can be such a positive thing, because it integrates these species into our lifestyle, into our culture, into our communities, you know. And then when we know something well, because we notice it, we gather it, we use it, and we remember it, and we tell stories about when we harvested this wild garlic and we made this recipe and everybody came together to eat. You know, it becomes so integrated within our being and our life, you know, that it's a part of us, like a member of our family, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
There's this issue that some people have And it can be an issue where you say, oh, you're just looking at these things as resources. This
exactly.
is, but no, when you look at things as a resource that is actually part of your way of life, then it isn't just like some sort of greedy, selfish thing. You've woven it into the fabric of your life, so you then have an emotional attachment to this species.
I know.
You kind of love it, like you do your family in a way. But what I was going to say with the Convention on Biodiversity that also came out of the Rio Summit, so we got the sustainable development idea, and then the Convention on Biodiversity was supposed to be an example of this, So they said, aim 1, we need to conserve the resources that we have in terms of species. So they call that genetic resources. Aim 1, conserve genetic resources. Aim 2, to develop the sustainable use of genetic resources. And this is something which I think has just been passed by. The objective was that we now need to basically search the planet and look at all these species in a utilitarian way, not because we think, well, we're the most important species and it's all here for us in some kind of arrogant way. Not at all. The thing is that if we're going to weave this fabric between us and the ecology, then we need to have a reason to be related and involved. And this is a strategy, that was outlined all of those years ago in the Convention on Biodiversity. What I was going to say, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot about this.
No, don't worry.
I want to know what you think, but the point is, when we do what we do, there you are with your restaurant and all of us foragers, we're getting out there and gathering and trying to think, how can I make a soup with this? How can I make wine? How can I make a salad? I wonder what else this is good for. And we search the ethnobotanical literature. We talk to chefs and foragers and just everything we can. We're making this inquiry. How may we build a relationship with this species through a practical use? What we're doing then is we're developing the sustainable use of genetic resources, and the outcome of that is that we then, it's like a safety net, that because we know this species, because we value it, then we're gonna defend it, and we're gonna try and make sure it's still here tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. So what I'm trying to say is basically your work is that it is this very important work to conserve the resources by finding a way to weave them into human culture.
Some people say I have a very strict mind about that, because I remember when I first opened my restaurant, it was the first week, a woman came asking for parmigiana, which is a typical Italian dish made with aubergines, but it was Christmas. And I said, no parmigiana. Because it's not, aubergines, you can find them. If you want it, you can come back in July. But apart from that, I always say there's people, ordering for catering or takeaway some recipes on my menu, and I say no, because I can't. There's, even if there are plants, in the woods, there's a few, and I can't forage them. So I'm also trying to let them learn about this specific aspect, because there's a sentence I always say, like a motto, nature is not a supermarket, because I've seen many people saying, we go foraging because we find stuff as in the aisles of the supermarkets. No, I don't agree with that. And also, but this is linked to a more, economic and bureaucracy, is that nature hasn't got a VAT number. This is what I always say, because it's a completely different world, and we need to reapproach to it in a different way. We have lost, I think.
Yeah, but there is, there is an abundance out there with some of these things. For example, like one of the things that I love is with the leaves is just how they all grow back. Like if you start to harvest all the seeds of some plant, this is a problem.
Yeah.
The plant will die. If you dig all the roots, well, maybe it'll die, maybe it won't. Some plants, when you dig the roots, you break into fragments, and so the fragments grow new plants. So that's a positive thing, actually. Some plants are evolved. Their ecology is they want things to dig up the roots because these fragments will produce many more plants than if nothing is digging them up. That's an interesting thing. But when it comes to leaves, I probably don't go with your 5% thing, to be honest, because the leaves do grow back. So you can.
Yeah, no, of course. No, but wait. It was 5%. It's a kind of, strict rule. I haven't decided. It's a kind of suggestion, because when people discover a plant, at least this is what happens most of the times here, they say, oh, wow, that's amazing. I want it all. When there's an offer at the supermarket, people go there and buy everything. It's the same. So, oh, wow, tons of leaves. Okay, perfect. The tree is bare. I mean, this is what happens. So this kind of rule, let's say, of 5% is useful in order to don't let people destroy.
Yeah.
But it's a kind of suggestion. Also because, for example, garlic, people go there and dig the bulbs up.
Now that is very destructive. There's no question about it.
Also because I always say, you can use its leaves.
Yeah.
So but there's also kind of tradition, because in Italy, you don't eat garlic leaves or, for example, carrot leaves. This is something crazy. When you go to the supermarkets and you find carrots, cultivated carrots, there's a normal one, the root,
Yeah.
and it costs, let's say, 1-2 euros per bag. And then there's the carrots with their leaves, and they cost something like 30-40% more, even if people don't know how to use those leaves.
They're not using them, no.
Because it's a fashion, And this is what should be explained to people. This links to the fact that 5%, because you need to understand what to use, why, and the best way to nurture yourself and not to destroy the planet.
Yeah. And nurture yourself. That's a lovely aspect too, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I'm sure this must be a big focus with these kind of salads and dishes that you're serving, like the health benefits that kind of food has.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what my clients are mostly astonished of, because let's say when I talk about Chenopodium wild spinach, and I say that it has got let's say 8-10% more iron than the supermarket one. They say, oh really? Because they can't believe it, because they think that cultivated stuff is full of nutrients. Or what I like best, I'm really in love with that, is conifers, because particularly, fir, pine, I prepare a tea, I prepare a syrup, and to serve with ancheeses. And this one is, it has, I think, 20% more vitamin C than lemons, citruses. And people say, oh, wow, well, that's incredible. That's also because I think most of the people can't understand properly what's inside what they're eating.
Yeah.
And discovering wild plants help in this sense. Of course, you may want to pay attention, because you surely know, for example, Umbelliferae and Umbelliferae are mostly toxic plants, so you need to eat them not so often, and you have to pay attention in identifying them. But it's interesting, because when people, I used to say, when people enter the tunnel of wild plants, they don't easily go out anymore.
Yeah, that's it. I offer a kind of funny warning when people come on my walks.
Tell me, because I have one too.
Yeah. Okay, let's swap warnings. Yeah. So I say to people, okay, if any of you like hiking and you really like to sort of set out in the morning with your journey and your destination, you're going to hike quickly and you're going to go 30 kilometers or however long, and you're going to go straight there. You maybe stop for lunch, but you're going to keep moving. I said, if this is what you like to do when you go out walking, you need to leave now. Because after you finish today, and I've introduced you to all these plants, you'll never be able to do that again. You are condemned to distraction. You are condemned to stopping and checking what this plant is. You are condemned to climbing over the fence to see what that bush is over there.
That's amazing and funny, because you tell them you are condemned. And that's right. No, what I used to say is funny, because it's almost the same thing, but in another way, because most of the people coming, I live in the mountains in the Pre-Alps near the Lake of Como, and most of the people come from Milan and come here also because, following a foraging course is also a way to pass a different Saturday and Sunday, a different weekend. So they come here to stay in the countryside, in the mountain, good weather, And when they come back on Monday, they are stuck at a traffic light in the center of Milan, but there's a tiny piece of green near the traffic light, and the traffic light becomes green, and there's all the cars behind, sounds, whatever, but the first car of the person who followed the foraging course isn't moving, because being in the foraging tunnel is looking at the tiny piece of green, trying to identify if there's, oxalis, sorrel, or whatever. And that's amazing, because people call me, you were right, it's something spontaneous, something that I can't control. And I like it, because it means that there's tiny seeds in our soul, linking us back to our ancestors. And there's curiosity, and there's hope. I like to see it that way, a bit romantic, but I think.
Well, it's that we know there's something to eat. Most people, unfortunately, they'll go outside and they don't understand there's something to eat. That's crazy. But so we get to sort of, like you say, there's these little seeds inside of us, and we get to put a bit of water on that seed and let it sprout. But then it's going to grow. It doesn't need us to come back tomorrow and pour some more water on it. It's already active. Once people have that. And I think that is the discovery, in one sense, that you realize there's something to eat here.
Yeah.
You don't have to go somewhere else to get something to eat. But I guess it isn't just that. It's when you've as you say, the curiosity and so on. I don't know. It just makes you an active participant.
That's true. That's exactly what I was saying. Yeah.
You get involved now. And it's because, and really what it is you realize you're an organism. These days we think that we're something else, we think we're an object, or we think we're a machine. I think if you honestly sort of ask people how they think about their place in the world, and it is like we're a machine. We use money to get stuff to us, There's no relationship there. It's just like a machine. You just put your money into that slot machine and it spits out some product that you've purchased. So whereas all of a sudden you become an organism that's part of this dance of life. There's stuff around you. It's touching you with your eyes, and then you touch it with your hands, and then. And
that's also a very important aspect. The fact that you, all of your senses are involved. And sometimes I wonder, after a foraging day, I go to bed and I start thinking, is there some other human activity who can let you use all your senses all together. And this is another meaning for me of the path I've chosen. And also because I never get bored. There's always something to discover, something to talk about, something to taste, something to create. It's never ending.
So I guess in the kitchen we're thinking about the sensory thing with flavor and aroma, maybe more than the other senses.
Yeah, of course.
You must have that very well developed. I wonder, has that been a journey for you to differentiate between flavors and?
I don't know if I understood properly your question, but these make me think of something. When I started foraging with my grandma, what we foraged most were, dandelion chicorée, or what we call in South Italy cicoriette, that is small chicories, all the sour species that go together. There are at least 22 species going together in a dish, in a recipe that is called cicoriette. We just put them cut in a pan with extra virgin olive oil and wild garlic. And if you want, you can add some chili later. That's all. I mean, that's a basic recipe for all the farmers in South Italy. And I remember that not every day, but at least twice a week, we used to eat that. And I was, something like, I can't stand it anymore because I was a child and that was sour. And so I said, please, no, because I don't like the taste.
You mean
when I grew up?
Bitter?
Bitter, sorry. Bitter.
Yeah.
Bitter. It was bitter, so I couldn't stand it because I was a child, and the flavor, the bitter aroma, I disliked it. And when I grew up, I think as our body, also our perception changes. And so, for example, particularly in the last 2 years, I don't like sweet things, and I like bitter. And this helped me a lot also in shaping new recipes and new ideas. For example, I don't use sugar. There's a nice aspect to consider, because in Italy we mostly use sea salt, and most of it comes from a place in northern Apulia called Margherita di Savoia, which is a place on the seaside where it's full of pink flamingos. It's a very nice place. Many people go there to visit because it's astonishing as a panorama, as a habitat. It's a very nice habitat. And I don't know why, one night I dreamt of this place, and I woke up in the morning and I said, how do we create sea salt? So there's, basins with seawater, the water evaporates, and sea salt grains, let's say, flakes. It's what remains, is what remains. And I said, why don't trying that with fruits? So that I started making it with my dehydrator, because I didn't have anything to, let the water, the juice evaporate. And so I have those flakes of fruit that actually it's fructose. But you can do that with birch leaves or maple leaves. And my idea was a kind of substitute, because I received from a member of the Association of Foragers this object to make a hole in the trunk of birch and maple to obtain let's say the syrup. But I don't want to use it. I mean, because I care for the tree. I know there are some. I use it. I obtain the birch syrup and maple syrup, but it's something I always do with, I don't like it. So I try to find an alternative. And this is what I found. And it's also, it depended on the change of my perception of flavors and aroma, of taste.
So you now have a number of different ones, do you? A number of different ones of these flakes that you've dehydrated from different.
Yeah.
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 Wow. And it is sweet when you do maple leaf.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. The sweetest one is of course fruits. And what I like, for example, is blackberries, but not so ripe when they are a bit red, because it's sugary but acidic at the same time. So you really can invent things, and using them, for example, in pastries is amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. I like experimenting. It's like, a baby, a child in a toy shop.
Yeah. Well, it's so great. But the thing is, I guess, why is there only one of you? I mean, like, we need many, and there isn't only one of you in the sense, like, but you've been very thorough with what you're doing. You're doing very comprehensive, and it's a big project and a it's a great ongoing study that you're doing to because it's one thing to discover what's out there. I've thought about my journey with plants and thought, well, the first bit was finding out what was out there, and then it was finding out where the really good patches are for all of the things that are out there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I'm definitely in stage 3 now, which is like, okay, but we want to know the best things that we can do with this, because in the end, we need to recreate culture around these plants, and it starts with the super curious, and
I agree. That's what I always say.
Yeah. So I'm putting you in the category. You are the super curious.
Yeah, that's it. And you know what? I told you I left Apulia to go in the Prealps to live here, and I started buying books. In Italy, there weren't and there aren't a lot of foraging books, so I started looking abroad, and one of my first ones.
My book. Thank you.
Yeah. And I've been extremely lucky, because I started I wanted to explain this, because when I was in my, let's say, 17, 18, I had to decide what to study at university. And my first year was at the agriculture faculty. And the only exam I passed was botany. And immediately after, I came back to my old love, that is foreign languages. And I followed courses of Anglo-Saxon, Gothic, Mittelhochdeutsch, ancient languages. And, many people say classical studies aren't useful. That's untrue, because thanks to my studies, I could read manuscripts and recipes from, our ancestors. Yeah. And that's, I think I'm grateful for that, because it's the base of my study. It gave me a different scope.
It's amazing. So you managed to find some ancient recipes for some of the wild plants, and you've brought that into.
Yeah, I let's say there's a very important manuscript in the British Museum that's called Lacnunga. Lac was a physician in Anglo-Saxon, leech, and it's full of recipes for physicians to cure phytotherapy, let's say. But inside, if you read between the lines, you can find cuisine.
Okay.
And it's fascinating.
Can you give me...
I told you about ground ivy.
Yes. Yes.
You can find it there. And, there's plenty of stuff to discover. But not only, of course, in that manuscript, there's tons of even poems, but even Shakespeare, let's say, there are some hints throughout his works. And, I'm a bit crazy about that because I like literature. So I put together literature and white food.
I think this is amazing because there is a really big thing around ethnobotany, which is
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
This is something else. Like in terms of this historical approach that you're taking. Do you know anyone that's really done this, like as their specialism, just like the historical uses of wild plants?
Well, there's, I think, many ethnobotanists. I can't pronounce probably his name, Lucas Lucai.
Yeah, it's Wukas Wuchai actually, but as he corrected me when I did a podcast.
Because I didn't know how to pronounce it. It's Polish, I think, and I don't know how to pronounce it.
I had called Wukash Lukash for years. But the day I did a podcast with him, he finally put his foot down and made me pronounce his name right.
Okay, so I followed him before. Yeah. I've been reading his papers, and he's one of the people I think is doing this job, but mainly, in many different countries. Yeah. I'm even if I'm not, graduated in ethnobotany or I didn't study it properly, it's kind of hobby to me. Yeah. I have my method and I focus on Scandinavian and Germanic stuff because that's what I like.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, let me give a look because I think there's surely Andrea Pieroni. Yeah. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
I know him.
He's from Pollenzo Gastronomic University.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And
the focus isn't on the history. I agree. Wukash is doing some historical stuff, but it just made me realize this is probably a whole discipline that I don't know. Like I'm not aware of a text. I'm not aware of a text that is just doing the kind of work that you're describing there.
No, I don't think so because I'm always searching. I'd love to find something like that. And I was telling you, I know Andrea Pieroni because he is the series editor of this kind of texts. But they focus on, let's say, if Solanum nigrum is edible or not. Where if you forage it in the Middle East, it can be edible. And why? Compounds or ancient recipes. But not, I mean, my approach, as I told you before, is probably more romantic because I go delve into what our ancestors were saying about plants and try to give it a modern way of being intended. I don't know how to explain that. It's just sometimes it's just a sentence, a verse with a plant in it, and there's a kind of idea in my mind that I start searching, and at the end I come out with different recipes or different cooking suggestions.
Yeah,
that's what I do. I mean, I'm.
Yeah, I mean, it's a point of departure, isn't it? You find a place to start from based on the way people used to use something or the way that people used to think about it, which is what you might find in Shakespeare or something.
Well, let's say it's a stupid thing and doesn't concern cuisine. But, for example, Shakespeare says, rosemary, that's for remembrance. And now everybody's saying that if you smell rosemary, it helps you remind things.
Yeah. So I got a funny story about that. So I'm visiting my mother recently, and she's old. She's got Parkinson's, and she's quite frail. So she has carers come to see her, and we're sitting outside in the garden, and sometimes. Part of the Parkinson's is her body kind of shuts down and she can't really talk very well and she can't. But I know rosemary is a stimulant.
Yeah.
So I get the rosemary and I rub it under her nose and say, come on, Mum, breathe that in. And she loves rosemary. She loves herbs. So she's right with it. She's going, oh, okay, that's good, yeah. and then I broke a big branch off the bush and I stuck it in the letterbox. We're sitting in front of the front door, and I stuck it in the letterbox so that I would remember to take it in, so that we put it in the kitchen and I can put it in the cooking later. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then we go through the door, and because my mum needs help, and I've opened the door, I didn't notice the rosemary. I don't remember it. I walked past it, and in we go. And then a while later, the carer arrives, and she comes in holding the branch of rosemary. Why have you put this branch of rosemary? I found this branch of rosemary. And she said, was it for me? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you know my name is Rosemary. And I said, no, I didn't know your name is Rosemary, but now I will remember.
Of course.
I'm in there holding this. So it's so funny you say that the connection in Shakespeare is that Rosemary helps you remember. But it is actually very literally, there's studies been shown that if you do this thing of smelling rosemary whilst you're doing some kind of mental task like an exam,
yeah, it helps you.
People will perform better when they've done that. So it must also help to remember in an exam. So it's real, it's true. It's not just a line in Shakespeare.
Yeah, of course. No, but my example was to explain in a way that I really find suggestions in every place, in every, let's say in a magazine, at a hairdresser. You go there and read something, let's give a look. Try to search for that and discover. And I always come out with something at the end. Of course, you need to know where to look for and how to search. And it's something, you need time.
Yeah.
You need time.
You need time. And anyway, in discussing whether or not there is a book that kind of conveys all of this stuff, and you seem to think that there isn't one, and I seem to think that you should write one.
And I'm writing it.
Good.
I'm writing it, and it will be ready next year, I think, because there's one of my favorite families that is ombrellifere in Italian, the ones with the umbrella, and it's full of things to say, full of recipes, of ideas, and ferula communis. I don't know the name in English, unfortunately. It's a toxic one, a very big one. And they use it in Apulia to prepare, make, I don't know how it's called, baskets, maybe. Yeah. They use it to make baskets, but they also ate it. And I tried when I was a child. I tried the juice. And I've heard of other people that used to cook with that. Recently, some people, for example, even if the India Association of Foragers have read a post about that, they are used to eat Conium maculatum.
Right.
And so I think there's something hidden we don't know yet, or that we have lost. Not specifically on toxic plants, I mean. So I'm going to delve into umbellifer more, because I think there's so much more to be discovered.
Well, one point of interest for me with umbellifer, and I'll just quickly say for people listening that don't know what we're talking about. So this is otherwise known as the carrot family or Asteraceae. And
carrot family.
Yeah, and as you say, the flowers all look like an umbrella.
Yeah.
But the really familiar ones, just for everybody listening, there's lots of herbs and spices. So you've got things like parsley and fennel, cumin, coriander, dill.
Alexander's.
Well, maybe less familiar, that one. For foragers, it's familiar. Yeah. And then
I love it.
Yeah.
Also because of the Latin name, the binomial helps you a lot.
Yeah.
Olus atrum. Atrum means black, and its seeds are black.
Yeah. And the Smyrnium refers to the fact it smells like myrrh, doesn't it? Is that right?
Yeah.
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 But what I was going to say is that the group that interests me, there's the Oenanthes species, which in English they're water dropworts, and our really most deadly carrot fat, well, possibly not, but the plant that's killed more people in England than any other one is probably hemlock water dropwort, which grows very abundantly by the rivers near here.
Yeah, that's it.
But there's this one that's in the same genus called corky fruited water dropwort, which I don't know.
We don't have it in Italy, I think.
But it's a good edible. They eat it a lot in Turkey. So
really,
this is the funny thing.
Sorry for the question. Can you remember the binomial?
I'm gonna have to move. Okay, so I got my plant book. I'll have a look.
Enante pimpinelloides, maybe. Yeah, we have some specimens in near the border with Slovenia. We don't have it in Lombardy or elsewhere in Italy. They just found some specimens there.
We don't have it much in my county either, but apparently in Dorset there's a lot, and it has some edible tubers as well, apparently. Corky fruited water dropwort, yeah. So that's a funny thing. You'd think that this genus with the most deadly plant would all be deadly, and yet this is an edible one. And here's another one, which has got a question mark over it. So Lacanali, Oenanthe Lacanali, Lachenalil. And now for us, that's parsley water dropwort. Now, I suspect that one is also not poisonous. Now, nobody listening should go and eat it, but I suspect it's not poisonous because there's records of cattle eating it and not suffering any harm. Now, if cattle eat it, they eat a lot.
And they don't get harmed, so maybe it's
harmed. So
it's edible.
That suggests to me that it's edible, and yet so that's potentially two in the same genus. So that's kind of surprising to me. Anyway, we need to know more. That's the problem. See, I cannot understand how such an important subject as this is left to the independent super curious like you and me and Wukash and the Association of Foragers and people all around the world like us who have just decided we think this is so interesting and we're going to give all our time and attention.
Yeah.
It shouldn't just be like, why is the World Health Organization and the what is it, the Food and
Drug Administration? Yeah, I agree with you.
These things should be at the top of the list for our priority.
I agree with you, and that's what I always say. Also, because it depends on the countries. For example, there's a herb. It's Ornithogalum umbellatum. Probably you know it as Star of Bethlehem.
Yep.
Yeah, we currently eat it, the whole plant, tubers under the ashes in the fireplace. It's a common herb, always been eaten in Greece and Apulia, South Italy. Elsewhere, oh no, it's toxic, you can't. It happens the same with lesser celandine. In Italy, if you tell people you can eat it, oh no, absolutely not, you will die. So
right.
It depends on the countries, on the places, on the people, on the law that has been perpetrated.
Yeah, and so what we need is we do need some laboratory analysis of some of these plants to really settle.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a dream.
But like it's a dream I'm pursuing, Like the name of this podcast, World Wild, is also the name of the project that isn't very much happening yet. Like, but I've been talking for years about we need this World Wild project. Then we need to get millions of pounds and dollars and yen and every other currency behind this, because this research to explore the genetic resources of our planet and find out how we can engage with these species and get them back into use, to promote our well-being. And then the reciprocal relationship that we have with the plants promotes the well-being of the ecology. This is the most important work on the planet. And, the only people who are actually, putting money behind exploring genetic resources right now, Monsanto.
I know.
they're exploring the genetic resources so they can splice them onto wheat and other things and make their terrible Frankenstein crops even more terrible. Whereas that's not what that thing was written for. It was written for people to as a global project. Let's find out what these resources are, because if not, we're going to see things go extinct that could have been the key to our survival. That's for our sake. Yeah. And then for the sake of the biosphere, when we know these things, then when we anchor them with our culture and our devotion to their survival, because they're important to us now, and not just important because they're useful, because when you work with something, you fall in love with it, and then you don't want your loved ones to die. So, this is such important work. And, I just want to cheer and celebrate and applaud your work, because it is so important and so focused and so detailed. But, we need thousands more to just get on, because it's just normal human behavior. It is normal human behavior to notice the other living things that are living in the same place as you are, and to ask a question. Who are you, and what do you do, and how can I involve you in my life? And that's why we need to know, are you poisonous? Or if I fry you, if I leave you soaking in ashes for 6 weeks, may you not be poisonous anymore? These are the questions and the lines of inquiry that every human being alive needs to be making now. And then we might make it. We might make it. Right now, but no one's asking these questions except for a few people. We're in danger of losing the species out there and losing ourselves, because we're not going to survive. We're not going to survive unless we anchor ourselves in the life systems of the biosphere. And that's what living things do. They just get anchored in the life system of this place that they live in. And I just love it now, because we're in lockdown and everybody has to just notice their immediate surroundings. At least they might stand a better chance of noticing just now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. But there's so much work to be done, because there's not so many people who'd like to come on this path, because somehow the other different kind of life is easier.
Yeah, well, maybe it's like people are saying, it's got to collapse before people get back to normal. To me, it's like we're under a spell. Everyone's enchanted.
Yeah, exactly.
Industrial consumer thing. They're enchanted. They've been bewitched, and something needs to happen to just snap them out of it. And they go, oh, where am I? Oh, I forgot. But now I remember, so we need, but maybe.
Hopefully,
yeah.
Hopefully we can, we can see a change like that.
Yeah, well, maybe this is the beginning. I've always been part of the thing of saying, well, surely, if we just communicate this message well enough, people will get it.
Yeah, you're right. Also, because it's not so common to communicate this kind of, content.
Yeah, and it is like good news. Like it's just like, hey, here's this message. This is a really good news. This is a message about your surroundings. Your surroundings are full of food, and
now this is a message about your life.
Yeah,
and the life around you. That's it.
That you are part of this positive thing. The life is very strong. Life is very nurturing. It's complex and in some ways dangerous, but like, you are invited to this party. You do not have to stay outside in your industrial consumer bubble. You can actually participate in this life that's actually all around you.
And it's not so difficult.
Yeah. It isn't so difficult, because you can start with one plant, you can start with one recipe, and that's what, like for me,
small steps, one after the other.
Well, it's funny because, you held my book up earlier, and what I did when I wrote that book was I tried to be as comprehensive as possible. So I did quite a lot of research, but actually there's maybe 300 and something plants there, and with the ones that are mentioned within the entries where I say, well, there's a similar one that's also good, there's maybe about 300, nearly one for every day of the year. There's about 360.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be thorough. And my friend Robin Harford has since been more thorough. Not that he's put it in book form yet, but he's got a list of about 700 or 800 British plants that you could eat or use. But the funny thing is now, I'm starting to think. I'm working on a couple of projects at the moment. We're working on a little magazine that we can give away, and we're working on a database, which is something I want to talk to you about, and just some simple films to teach kids to forage. And what I'm realizing is I don't want 300 plants in this magazine on this database to begin with, or in the films. We want to take maybe 15 or 20.
Yeah, to begin with.
Well, just find the ones that everybody can find.
Yeah, I started a magazine in Italian 5 years ago.
Okay.
It's called I skogen. It's a Swedish, meaning in the forest.
Right.
And to start with, I encountered the same issue you're telling about. It is plants were so many, and I wanted to restrict the scope in order to let people understand the easiest one.
Okay. Yeah.
So recently I changed, and I began making monographies. So there's the first one on cabbages, Cruciferae brassicacea, brassicas. The second is about conifers. The last one, on the 21st March, spring wildflowers. And that's a huge one because there's really all the wildflowers in the Mediterranean area. So it's interesting because it also helps you understanding, is it necessary to go to people and tell them about those 300, 700, whatever species? As you said, you can start little by little, just to see those that are in your habitat around you.
Yeah.
So that you can recognize them and identify them easily.
Yeah.
And then later on, if you'd like, you can go on with something more specific, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what I pull out of the very last thing that you said there is this little 3 words, just to start.
Yeah.
Because we need people
to start.
Feel able just to start, because once you have this beginning, then we're like we said earlier, they're condemned. They're stuck in the tube. You can't get out. But it's a very nice place to be. We should emphasize what a nice place it is to be when you know what there is to eat around you, and there's nothing like it. If you've never done it, and then you go out and gather a nettle from your garden and you make this soup. We've just started the Facebook group Foraging for Kids. I don't know if you've been on it, but
yeah.
There are parents who this week have done something simple with wild garlic or nettles or something for the first time, and you just think, wow, this is just a start. This is
absolutely,
it's good stuff. And we think about how to convey the message, and I guess though. You're trying all sorts of things, right? You've got a restaurant to do that. You've got a magazine to do that. We're just trying to get the word out, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen after, the lockdown, because we don't know if restaurants will be opening again and the measures they will take for that. But at least I'm in the mountains, in open spaces. I don't have, 80 seats, because I want to promote the fact that less people eating good food. Also because, as I told you before, nature is not a supermarket. I go there and forage the right percentage, the right amount for a number of people. That can't be too many. So I'm lucky in this sense, but at the same time, there's a strict regulations to follow, and so we'll see what happens later.
Yeah, no, it's causing a big change for all of us. Yeah.
Yeah, but I've seen that in the UK is a bit different. You can try to go out. You're free in a way. Here, really, you can't do anything. Anyway.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, but we perhaps don't have such strong restrictions. I mean, we're still trading as forager, So I'm still.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen people saying, "I'm going on the coast today to forest and see weeds. Do you think if it's worth it or not?" Here you can't. I'm lucky because I just go here outside on the top of the mountain. There's plenty of primrose and violet and hawthorn, whatever. So it's my land. I go there and forage and come back in 10 minutes. But if I think to people living in a 2-rooms flat in the center of Milan, I die.
No, I mean, I feel very lucky because we're in the country and we can go in the garden. Even if we couldn't go anywhere else, we've got a garden, and you just got to feel for people that are stuck in a flat somewhere and don't have that. It's
Yeah, absolutely.
And what would be nice, maybe, because I'm really trying to encourage people just to find an easy to find plant and start working with it. So do you have some favorite things that you do with nettles?
Apart from letting them rot under the rainwater in order to obtain threads and to prepare tissue.
Okay. You do some nettle fiber.
Yeah, nettle fiber. Yeah. No, I was thinking about but it's something really easy. I use nettle powder, but dehydrated at, let's say, 30 degrees Celsius, because you won't use more, in order to let it remain green, to color, to give color to pastry, to dough.
Yeah.
And so that at the end you obtain this very green color in crackers, biscuits, whatever. I'm collaborating with a starred chef, and last summer there was a big winery that was had to present its new wines, and they were organizing a dinner on Monte Bianco in the Alps, and it was something like 4,000 meters, I don't know. And I asked for an alpine dinner with all the herbs from the Alps, but I brought with me this nettle powder, and we made. I explain in English. It's a sort of Wellington, beef Wellington. Yeah, it's a sort of wet, but in a crust. And there was this deer inside, and outside the crust, the deer was pink, and the crust outside with nettle powder was shocking green. And it was, a contrast. It was amazing. I have some pictures, and I will send them if you want to see it.
Yeah.
It's something nice, and it's also really easy to make. Otherwise, I make melokia, which is a Greek recipe, and it's just mallow and nettles, a kind of puree, let's say. We say in Italian vellutata because it's just like, very smooth.
Yeah.
And with a tablespoon of almond cream inside, and it's comfort food.
It's just like a little soup, little smooth.
Yeah, but it's not so liquid as a soup. It's much more like, pumpkin puree.
Okay.
It's a bit halfway between a soup and a puree.
Mm.
It's warming in autumn and winter nights.
Yeah.
I used to put it in on my freezer. I used to freeze it so that you have plenty of it in winter when iron is needed to boost your body.
Yeah. Well, that sounds lovely.
Thank you.
Well, it's lovely to speak to you.
For me too. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I hope things get back to a situation where you can, carry on serving food to your guests, because it sounds an amazing experience, and I need to come and have that.
Absolutely. When the lockdown is over, please come here as a guest. I will really appreciate if you can come and stay with me for a while so that we can forage together.
That would be amazing.
Thank you for listening to this week's World Wild podcast. And as ever, I'd encourage you to go to the Forager website, to the page that hosts the podcast, www.forager.org.uk/podcast. And that's going to give you various links and notes about this week's episode. So it's always worth having a look there. And also check out my Instagram page, which is Miles Irving Forager. And if you're on Facebook, do check out the Foraging for Kids Facebook page, because there's lots of stuff going up there. And even if you're not a kid and don't have kids, it's all kind of relevant and nicely accessible videos and other posts showing what people are doing with wild plants and giving you some tips what you could do during this lockdown period and beyond. And then lastly, I just want to mention a plant for this week. For those of you in a similar kind of climate or region as we are, there's a plant called garlic mustard, otherwise known as Jack by the Hedge. And as the name suggests, it's mustardy and garlicky. So when you chew down on the leaves or the flowers or any part of that plant, you're going to get this slightly sort of oniony flavor and slash sort of garlicky flavor and also a distinct sort of mustardy heat. Just now, so to begin with, the leaves of that plant when it first grows, either from seed or from its biennial rootstock, they're kind of kidney shaped with a sort of toothed edge and quite dark green. Just now they're coming up with a slightly more nettly, a slightly more pointy leaf and a slightly paler green as the flowering stems are coming up. And where we are, the flowering stems are fully up and are opening up. The buds are opening up into these beautiful white flowers, which as a mustard family or cabbage family plant, those flowers have 4 petals. That's quite typical of this family. And in fact, the old Latin name for the family was cruciferae for cross, which obviously has 4 branches to it. So you can pick those flowers, you can pick those leaves, have the lovely sort of garlicky, oniony, mustardy thing. It's quite a strong flavor, so you might want to use it with other flavors. But there you are. Just get out and have a look for the garlic mustard this week. Okay, well, that's it. And thanks again for listening to this week's World Wild podcast.